Hi everyone, welcome to Learn Python. In our previous video we have talked about functions, why these are important and how to write simple functions using no argument or maybe one or more than one argument. We have also talked about default values in functions. Now today we will talk about print versus return. It is very important to understand, sometimes we want to print a function, sometimes we want the function to return some value. So let me show you this thing with some example. And I am just writing one simple function here. For example, my function takes two numbers and add these two numbers. So my function name is some, when we try to give some name to the function, we need to be careful that we don't give the name which is already there in Python standard function. We should not give the names which are the keywords in that programming language. For example, I am just trying to add two numbers and I wanted to give it a name sum. But we see here in the suggestion that sum is already a function in Python, right? Depending upon your ID, you might get these kind of suggestions that it is a function which takes some iterable and do something with that. So we should not give the name which is already there in Python. So let me give a new name, func1, and I can do num1 and num2. You can even understand this with a function with no parameters, that's not an issue. So here what I want to do is I want to just add these two numbers. So suppose I just want to do this computation, num1 plus num2, whatever these numbers are, I just want to add these two. Now when I say I want to do this addition operation, there are various ways I can use this function. First thing is I just print here what I get as the result of this operation, right? And when I say I have printed num1 plus num2, so this is my function, and to use this function I would need to call this function. So let me just run this and add some code chunks here. Now if I call this function func1, what happens is whenever we call the function, because the function includes print statement, so it will print what it will print. It will print the result of addition operation, and for that definitely we need to give two arguments. We have talked about this yesterday. So let me give any two arguments here, 10, 12. So it will add those two numbers and it will show me the result printed, because I am asking the function to print the result, right? Now what happens if instead of using this function directly, I want to store the value which I get by this function, means I want to store this addition in some object and later on I want to use that object. Can we do that? Let's try. So suppose I store this thing in a new object. I say val1 is equal to this. Now val1 is a new object. When I run this, nothing happens because I am just, okay, it's printing because here I am using print statement. So it's printing this value. If I try to print val1, I get none. Isn't it weird? Here we see val1 is 22 and here we see val1 is none. So these things are little confusing for beginners, but let's understand it slowly. Here in this function we are printing this sum and we are storing this function. We are not storing this sum, we are storing this function in some object val1. And now if I try to print that val1, I am getting none because this function is not returning anything. So it tries to look at the function and the function is not returning any value. I am getting none here. Let me make it more clear. If I change the function little bit by using return statement, for example, the same function I am using here, but instead of print I am using return here. So here I am saying that I want to return num1 plus num2, right? And now if I run this, I think I should have changed the name of the function also to avoid any confusion. Let me rerun this. So my func1 is still the same, which prints, and my func2 is this, which returns. And now if I do these things, I need these empty code cells. Yeah. So now if I call this function, simply call this function func2, and definitely I need to give two arguments. So again I am giving two arguments, 10 and 12. When I run this, I get the result here 22, because in Python the default behavior is Python automatically prints. If there is just one statement, Python automatically prints. If there are multiple statements, Python prints the last one. Let me show you. I have called this function and here I am just doing something else which is not relevant to this function. I am doing something else, x equal to 4. Now if I run the same cell, it will not print the result of func2, because func2 function is returning the addition of these two numbers, but there is no print statement in func2, right? And if we want to see the value which we get by doing this operation, we need to print it explicitly. The weird behavior is because of Python functionality that Python automatically prints the last statement. For example, here if you just write x and if you rerun this code, it will automatically print the value of x. So because of this, maybe if you are coming from other programming languages, you find it confusing that Python is print when you are not even asking to print in the function. So now if I want to print the result of func2, what I can do is I can use print here, and inside that I call this function. So now it will print whatever the function is returning, and the function is returning 22. So what I am trying to tell you, we will understand it with one more example, that we use return statement whenever we want to use this particular value, whatever we are trying to return, later on in some computation, maybe in some other function, then we need to return the function, right? And we want to print the function when we just want to check what is the result. So many times we want to print something just to debug our code, where is the error, what are the values it is taking, what are the values it is giving us. So we use print statement in between, but usually when we want to use the value obtained by that particular function, we need to use return function. I'll show you one more example, and then definitely we will understand it more when I will do a quick summary of this video also. So let me just add few code cells here. So let's this time understand with a simple function which doesn't take any argument. We have talked about say hi function, right? And this function just prints hi for us, hi, how are you, or whatever, right? So this is the function. Now if I call this function say hi, it will print, of course, because whenever this function is being called, this function will be executed and this function says you need to print something, so it will print, right? But suppose instead of calling this function like this, I store its value in some object. So I store its value in an object, say in x equal to say hi, and now if I print x, what happens is it will return none, because in Python every function has to return something, right? And if you are not using return statement in the function, by default it will return none, right? And it is printing hi also. Why it is printing? Because first we are calling the function. As soon as we call the function, this code chunk gets executed, and to get this code chunk executed, it will print hi also, right? So that is why we see hi here. And when we are trying to print the value stored in this function, we get none because we have not stored any value in this function. So if I change this function, if I want something to be stored in this function, I can use return statement. So now if I use return something, I want this function to return 5, right? And when I call this thing now, what will happen? Can you guess? Take a pause and guess. First of all, we are assigning and we are calling this function say hi. So whenever we call this function, it has to print whatever is written here. So it will print hi. Then we are returning 5 with this function. So it will return 5 and that value will be stored in x. And if we print x, it will print 5 also. So we will get hi and we will get 5 here instead of none. So I hope it is clear that when you want the function to store some value to be used at later stage, you need to use return statement. If it is still not clear, I would say just write 2, 3, 4 simple functions and try using print statement and return statement and try executing those functions, and you will see the difference yourself. In the next video, we will talk about positional argument and keyword argument. Thank you for watching.